10-year-old boy interrupts judge during trial. What he says shocks everyone. The marble floors of the Boston Federal Courthouse echoed with footsteps as spectators filed into courtroom 302. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of curious onlookers, reporters with their notepads at the ready, and law students eager to witness what the media had dubbed the Ghost Queen fraud case. By 8:45 a.m., even the standing room had filled up, leaving a line of disappointed people outside the heavy oak doors. At the defense table, Emily Carter sat motionless, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a gray suit that seemed a size too big for her thin frame. To most observers, she looked nothing like the mastermind of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. There was something almost fragile about her, the way her shoulders hunched slightly forward, how her fingers kept fidgeting with a button on her sleeve. But looks, as Assistant District Attorney James Morton would soon remind the jury, could be deceiving. "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom as Judge Sarah Henderson entered, her black robes sweeping behind her. The room rustled with movement as everyone stood, then settled back into an anticipatory silence. "Be seated," Judge Henderson commanded, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the papers before her. "We're here for case number 2025 CR 1484, the Commonwealth versus Emily Carter. Are both sides ready to proceed?" Morton stood first, straightening his red tie. "Ready for the prosecution, Your Honor." Defense Attorney Mark Roberts rose more slowly, his weathered face betraying the strain of the past weeks. "Ready for the defense, Your Honor." Emily watched them both, her face a careful mask of composure. But those closest to her might have noticed how her right hand trembled slightly as she placed it flat on the table. "Mr. Morton, you may present your opening statement," Judge Henderson directed. Morton approached the jury box with the confident stride of a man who never lost a major case. His polished shoes clicked against the floor as he positioned himself perfectly center, making eye contact with each juror. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice filling the courtroom with practiced precision. "This case is about trust, and how the defendant, Emily Carter, systematically destroyed it. Over the next few days, you will hear evidence of how this woman orchestrated one of the most sophisticated fraud schemes in Massachusetts history." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You'll learn how she created fake investment opportunities, forged documents, and convinced hundreds of hardworking people to trust her with their life savings. The evidence will show that Ms. Carter stole over $12 million before vanishing without a trace, only to resurface 3 years later living under an assumed name in Seattle." Emily's face remained unchanged, but her eyes followed Morton as he moved across the courtroom. There was something odd about her expression, not the usual anxiety or defiance typical of defendants, but something deeper, more complex. "The prosecution will present bank records, witness testimony, and forensic evidence that will prove, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Emily Carter is guilty of 28 counts of wire fraud, 18 counts of financial institution fraud, and 6 counts of identity theft." Morton's voice grew harder. "But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. You'll hear from victims like Sarah Chin, a retired schoolteacher who lost her entire pension. From Michael O'Brien, who had to sell his family's restaurant of 30 years. From Dave and Lisa Thompson, who can no longer afford their daughter's medical treatments." In the gallery, several people dabbed at their eyes. A gray-haired woman in the third row gripped her purse tighter, her knuckles white with tension. "The evidence will show that Ms. Carter isn't just a thief, she's a predator who targeted the vulnerable, earned their trust, and then betrayed them without remorse. When her victims began asking questions, she didn't just refuse to answer, she disappeared, leaving shattered lives in her wake." Morton turned to look directly at Emily. "And most telling of all, during the 3 years she was in hiding, did Ms. Carter try to make amends? Did she return any of the money? Did she show any remorse for the lives she destroyed? No. She was found living in a luxury apartment, driving an expensive car, while her victims lost their homes and their dignity." The prosecutor returned to the center of the courtroom. "The defense will try to complicate this simple truth. They may present elaborate explanations or try to shift blame. But remember this, $12 million didn't just vanish into thin air. It was stolen by the woman sitting right there. He pointed at Emily, who finally broke her stoic expression, not with guilt or defiance, but with something that looked almost like sadness. By the end of this trial, Morton concluded, you will know beyond any doubt that Emily Carter is guilty of every charge. And you will have the opportunity to ensure that justice is served, not just for the people in this courtroom, but for every victim who trusted Emily Carter and paid the price for that trust. Thank you. As Morton returned to his seat, Mark Roberts stood, tugging slightly at his worn suit jacket. Compared to Morton's polished performance, Roberts looked tired, almost defeated. But there was a quiet determination in his eyes as he approached the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice softer but no less clear. My colleague has painted you a picture of a criminal mastermind, a predator, a monster. But as you listen to the evidence over the coming days, I ask you to consider one question. Why? He let the word hang in the air. Why would a woman with no prior criminal record, a successful consulting business, and a spotless reputation suddenly decide to destroy everything she'd built? Why would someone smart enough to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme make basic mistakes that would eventually lead to her discovery? And most importantly, why would she stay in the country at all, when she had every opportunity to transfer the money overseas and disappear forever? Emily's eyes remained fixed on her hands, now clasped tightly in her lap. The prosecution's story is simple because it's incomplete. Over the course of this trial, you'll learn that nothing about this case is as straightforward as it seems. And when you hear all the evidence, not just the parts that fit a convenient narrative, you'll understand that Emily Carter's story is far more complex than anyone in this courtroom suspects. As Roberts continued his opening statement, no one noticed the young boy who had slipped into the back of the courtroom. He sat alone on the last bench, his small frame almost hidden behind the adults in front of him, his eyes fixed on Emily Carter with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. The real story was about to begin. 3 days into the trial, the prosecution was building what seemed like an ironclad case. Sarah Chin had testified through tears about losing her retirement savings. Michael O'Brien had shown the jury photos of the restaurant his grandfather had founded, now turned into a discount clothing store. Each testimony drove another nail into Emily Carter's coffin. On the fourth morning, Morton stood before Judge Henderson with an air of barely concealed triumph. The prosecution calls our final witness, Special Agent Thomas Weber from the Financial Crimes Unit. As Weber took the stand, Emily's posture changed for the first time in days. She sat straighter, her eyes following the FBI agent with an intensity that made her defense attorney glance at her curiously. Weber was sworn in, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights as he adjusted his position in the witness chair. Agent Weber, Morton began. Could you please explain to the jury how you tracked Ms. Carter to Seattle? Weber leaned forward. After 3 years of investigation, we received an anonymous tip about. She saved me from them. The shout exploded through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Every head whipped toward the back, where a small figure had jumped to his feet. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with unruly brown hair and a red hoodie that seemed too big for his frame. His face was flushed, his hands trembling as he gripped the bench in front of him. Young man! Judge Henderson's gavel cracked against the wooden block. This is a federal courtroom. You cannot. They're lying about her. The boy's voice cracked with emotion. She's not bad. She saved my life. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The jury members exchanged shocked glances. Morton's face darkened as he spun toward the disruption. But most striking was Emily Carter's reaction. All color had drained from her face, and for the first time since the trial began, she looked truly frightened. Bailiff, remove that child, Judge Henderson ordered, but the boy was already pushing his way toward the center aisle. My name is Daniel Hayes, he announced, his young voice carrying over the commotion. I was kidnapped 2 years ago, and she's the one who rescued me. The words fell like bombs in the suddenly silent courtroom. Judge Henderson's gavel remained frozen mid-strike. Emily Carter had closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging as if under an impossible weight. Your Honor, Morton recovered first. This is clearly a disruption designed to. Be quiet, Mr. Morton. Judge Henderson's sharp command cut through his protest. She studied Daniel carefully over her reading glasses. Young man, do you understand that interrupting these proceedings is a serious matter? Daniel's confidence wavered slightly, but he stood his ground. Yes, ma'am. But everything they're saying about Ms. Carter is wrong. She's not a criminal, she's a hero. Where are your parents? The judge asked, her tone softening slightly. My mom's outside. She didn't want me to come in, but I had to. I couldn't let them lie about her anymore. Judge Henderson looked toward the bailiff. Please find this young man's mother and bring her in. She turned back to Daniel. In the meantime, please approach the bench. As Daniel walked forward, his sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, Emily Carter's attorney suddenly came to life. Your Honor, I request an immediate recess to confer with my client. Denied, Mr. Roberts. Judge Henderson's eyes hadn't left Daniel. I want to hear what this young man has to say. Daniel reached the front of the courtroom, looking small but determined before the imposing bench. Emily Carter still hadn't opened her eyes. Now, Daniel, Judge Henderson began. You made a very serious claim. You said you were kidnapped? Yes, ma'am. Daniel's voice was clearer now, steadier. 2 years ago, from a park near my house in Portland. They kept me in a house way out in the woods. Made me work in their warehouse with other kids. We weren't allowed to talk or cry or anything. A woman's sob cut through the silence. Daniel's mother had entered the courtroom, supported by the bailiff. She was a slight woman with the same brown hair as her son, her face a mask of anguish. Danny, please, she whispered, but Judge Henderson held up her hand. Let him continue. The judge's voice was gentle but firm. Daniel, how does Ms. Carter fit into this story? Daniel turned to look at Emily, who finally opened her eyes to meet his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, a shared memory, a mutual pain. She worked in their office, Daniel said. She wasn't one of them. She would bring us water when no one was looking, and sometimes extra food. Then one night, when the guards were changing shifts, she helped me escape through a basement window. She told me to run and don't look back, but... He swallowed hard. I did look back. I saw one of the men hit her, but she just screamed at me to keep running. Emily Carter's composed mask had completely crumbled. Silent tears ran down her face as she pressed her hands against her mouth. Your Honor, Morton interjected, his face flushed with anger. This is absolutely ridiculous. There's no evidence of any kidnapping, no police reports that match this story. This is clearly a desperate attempt by the defense to... Actually, sir, Daniel's mother stepped forward, her voice shaking. There were police reports. Dozens of them. The Portland police have an entire file on Danny's disappearance. When he came home 6 months ago, he was too traumatized to tell us everything that happened. He just kept saying someone helped him, but he was afraid to say more because they would hurt her. Judge Henderson removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Mr. Morton, Mr. Roberts approached the bench. And Ms. Carter. She fixed Emily with a penetrating stare. I think it's time you told us what's really going on. As the attorneys moved forward, Daniel remained standing in the center of the courtroom, his small figure somehow filling the massive space with the weight of his truth. The story of Emily Carter was about to change dramatically, and with it, the lives of everyone in courtroom 302. Judge Henderson's chambers felt impossibly small with 7 people crowded inside. The judge sat behind her desk, flanked by the court reporter. Emily Carter occupied a chair in the corner, while her attorney stood protectively beside her. Morton paced near the window, his earlier confidence replaced by barely contained agitation. Daniel and his mother, Sarah Hayes, sat close together on a small leather sofa. Ms. Carter, Judge Henderson began, her tone measured but firm. I think it's time we heard your version of events. Emily's hands twisted in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't used it in years. Everything changed 3 years ago, when I noticed discrepancies in some of my clients' accounts. Your investment clients? Morton interrupted. No. Emily's eyes flickered to him briefly. My consulting clients. I was hired by Global Logistics Solutions to streamline their warehouse operations. Everything seemed legitimate at first: shipping manifests, employee records, inventory lists. But then I started noticing patterns. Warehouse shifts that didn't match the employee records. Inventory that moved without corresponding shipment documentation. And money, large amounts of it, flowing through shell companies. She paused, drawing a shaky breath. I thought I was uncovering corporate fraud. I started gathering evidence, planning to report it to the FBI. But one night, I stayed late at the warehouse, and I heard crying. Daniel's mother pulled him closer, her arms tightening around his shoulders. There were children, Emily continued, her voice breaking, hidden in a sectioned-off area of the warehouse. Some couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. They were forcing them to sort and package goods, working 12-hour shifts. When I tried to leave, I ran into Marcus Fletcher, the company's CEO. The same Marcus Fletcher who later accused you of fraud? Judge Henderson asked sharply. Emily nodded. He knew I'd seen too much. But instead of threatening me directly, he showed me files, detailed information about my family, my friends, my clients. He said if I didn't cooperate, accidents would start happening. Not to me, but to everyone I cared about. Morton had stopped pacing. You expect us to believe that a Fortune 500 company was running a trafficking operation? Not just trafficking. Emily's voice hardened. They were using my investment firm to launder the money. They forced me to create those fake investment schemes. Every transaction, every document they later used to frame me, it was all orchestrated by Fletcher and his partners. The money didn't go to me, it went to their overseas accounts. But why didn't you go to the authorities? Morton demanded. I tried. Emily's laugh was bitter. 2 days after I met with an FBI agent named David Chin, he died in a car accident. The message was clear, they had people everywhere. I couldn't trust anyone. The court reporter's typing had slowed, her fingers hovering over the keys as she listened. So you played along? Judge Henderson said quietly. For how long? 8 months. I documented everything, collected evidence, tried to find a way to expose them without putting more lives at risk. But I couldn't just watch those children suffer. Emily turned to Daniel. When I saw an opportunity to help Daniel escape, I took it. I knew they'd come after me, so I made it look like I'd stolen the money and run. I figured if they thought I was just another criminal trying to save myself, they wouldn't look too closely at where Daniel had gone. Sarah Hayes spoke up, her voice trembling. But why didn't you tell anyone after Danny was safe? Because it wasn't just Daniel. Emily's words fell like stones in the quiet room. There were 15 other children in that warehouse. If I'd come forward then, Fletcher would have made them disappear before anyone could find them. I had to wait, keep gathering evidence, try to find a way to save them all. And where is this evidence now? Morton asked, his prosecutor's instincts taking over. For the first time, Emily smiled. In a secure server, waiting to be released if anything happens to me. Every transaction, every document, security camera footage from the warehouse, everything they thought I was too scared to collect. When they finally tracked me down in Seattle, I knew what would happen. They'd frame me, try to discredit me before I could expose them. That's why I didn't run again. I needed this trial. Judge Henderson leaned forward. You deliberately let yourself be arrested? I needed a public platform where they couldn't silence me. A federal courthouse with hundreds of witnesses, media coverage, and official transcripts. Even Fletcher couldn't make everyone in this building disappear. Emily's voice caught. I didn't expect Daniel to be so brave. I thought I'd have to find another way to introduce the evidence. Daniel stood up suddenly, his small face set with determination. I couldn't let them hurt you again. Not after you saved me. The room fell silent as the full weight of Emily's sacrifice settled over them. For 3 years, she had lived with the burden of being seen as a criminal, enduring the hatred of her victims, all while carrying the psychological weight of what she'd witnessed and the constant fear of discovery. Judge Henderson studied Emily for a long moment before pressing a button on her desk phone. "Carol, get me FBI Director Matthews on the line. And have the bailiff clear the media from my courtroom. No one leaves the building until I say so." She looked at Morton. "Mr. Morton, I believe you have some calls to make as well. We need federal agents we can trust at Global Logistics Solutions within the hour." Morton nodded, his face ashen. "Yes, Your Honor. I know someone in the Organized Crime Division who—" A sharp knock at the door cut him off. The bailiff entered, his expression urgent. "Your Honor, there's something you need to see. One of the prosecution's assistants just tried to leave the building. When security stopped him, he attempted to draw a weapon." Emily Carter went rigid. "Fletcher knows. He must have someone watching the courtroom." "Multiple someones," the bailiff confirmed. "We've detained 3 more suspicious individuals in the lobby." Judge Henderson rose, her authority filling the small room. "Mr. Roberts, take Ms. Carter and the Hayes family to my private conference room. It has a separate security entrance. Bailiff, I want armed officers on that door. No one enters without my direct authorization." She turned to Emily. "Ms. Carter, I believe it's time to access that secure server of yours." As they moved to leave, Daniel suddenly wrapped his arms around Emily's waist. "I knew you were good," he whispered. "I knew they were lying about you." Emily hugged him back, her composure finally breaking as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you for being braver than I was," she whispered. The hidden truth was finally emerging. But as Judge Henderson's chamber emptied, the tension in the air suggested that the most dangerous part of their journey was just beginning. The courthouse had transformed into a fortress. Armed marshals patrolled the corridors while FBI cyber teams set up equipment in an adjacent conference room. Emily Carter sat at a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed her hidden server. The footage displaying on the multiple screens made hardened federal agents turn away in disgust. "My God!" Special Agent Diana Rodriguez whispered, watching security camera feeds of children being forced to work in dimly lit warehouses. "This is happening in 14 different locations across the country." Emily nodded grimly. "Fletcher's operation isn't just about cheap labor. The children are also used to package and move illegal goods, drugs, counterfeit merchandise, stolen property. They're the perfect workers because no one's looking for them, and they're too terrified to speak up." In Judge Henderson's private conference room, Daniel and his mother were giving statements to FBI agents specializing in trafficking cases. Through the glass walls, Emily could see Daniel drawing what appeared to be a map. "Ms. Carter," Agent Rodriguez pulled her attention back to the screens. "These financial records, the scope of this is staggering. Global Logistics Solutions was just the surface. There are judges, police officials, even federal agents on these payroll lists. Now you understand why I couldn't trust anyone." Emily pulled up another file. "This is Marcus Fletcher's personal communication log. Notice how many times he contacted Assistant District Attorney James Morton in the weeks before my arrest?" Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "Morton? The prosecutor on your case? He's been on Fletcher's payroll for years." Emily's voice was cold. "He helps bury evidence by prosecuting convenient scapegoats. I wasn't the first person they framed, just the first one who managed to gather enough evidence before they caught me." Suddenly, the door burst open. Judge Henderson strode in, her face tight with concern. "We have a problem. Marcus Fletcher just called an emergency board meeting at Global Logistics. Their IT department is initiating emergency server protocols. They're destroying evidence." "No, they're not." Emily allowed herself a small smile. "What they're actually doing is transferring all their data to a secure FBI server. I built a backdoor into their system months ago. Every time they think they're deleting files, they're actually creating backup copies." Rodriguez let out a low whistle. "You really did think of everything. I had 3 years to plan." Emily's smile faded. "But Fletcher's not stupid. When he realizes what's happening, a commotion in the hallway cut her off. Agent Rodriguez's hand went to her weapon as the door flew open again. A young FBI tech rushed in, his face pale. Agent Rodriguez, we just intercepted communications. Fletcher's sent teams to all 14 warehouse locations. They're moving the children. Emily was on her feet instantly. No, this is what I was afraid of. He'll make them disappear completely this time. Judge Henderson was already on her phone. This is Federal Judge Sarah Henderson. I need immediate tactical response teams at the following locations. She gestured for Emily to send her the addresses. But Emily was focused on something else on her screen, her face straining of color. They're not just moving the children. Look at these withdrawal patterns. Fletcher's liquidating accounts across 6 different countries. He's preparing to run. Rodriguez leaned in, studying the financial data. These transactions, they're not just random. This is a prepared contingency plan. He's activating sleeper accounts, transferring assets through a maze of shell companies. She straightened up. He's done this before. Wait. Emily's fingers were practically a blur on the keyboard. Some of these accounts, they're linked to other cases. Missing children cases going back 15 years. Fletcher isn't just running a trafficking ring, he inherited it. Global Logistics was created specifically to continue an operation that already existed. The implications hit the room like a physical force. This wasn't just about one corrupt CEO or a single company. They were looking at an organized criminal enterprise that had been operating for decades, hiding behind legitimate businesses, protected by corrupted officials at every level. A sharp knock at the door made everyone jump. Daniel's FBI interviewer stepped in, holding a crude map drawn in crayon. Ms. Carter? Daniel remembered something. He says there's another warehouse, one that wasn't on your list. Underground. Emily took the map with trembling hands. The childish drawings showed a series of tunnels beneath what appeared to be an abandoned factory. This is why the numbers never quite added up, she whispered. We weren't seeing all the locations. Where is this? Rodriguez demanded. I recognize this layout, Emily said. It's the old Miller Steel factory outside the city. Global Logistics bought it 3 years ago, but it never showed up in any of their active property records. I always wondered why they'd purchase a condemned building and just let it sit empty. Judge Henderson was already moving. Agent Rodriguez, how quickly can you get a tactical team there? Already making the call. Rodriguez stepped away, speaking urgently into her radio. Emily stared at Daniel's crayon map, her mind racing. The timing of those financial transfers. Fletcher's not just running. This is a scorched earth protocol. He's going to eliminate every trace of the operation, including the witnesses, Rodriguez finished grimly. Judge Henderson, we need to move now. If there are children in that underground facility. A sudden explosion rocked the courthouse, sending tremors through the floor. Alarms began blaring as smoke filled the corridor outside. Multiple explosive devices detonated in the parking structure, a marshal shouted through the chaos. We have armed suspects breaching the building's south entrance. Emily grabbed Daniel's map and her laptop. Fletcher's not just running, he's tying up loose ends. Starting with everyone in this building who knows the truth. Judge Henderson's voice cut through the chaos. Agent Rodriguez, get Ms. Carter and that evidence to a secure location. I'll coordinate with tactical teams from the federal building. She turned to Emily. You've carried this burden alone for 3 years, Ms. Carter. Not anymore. It's time to finish this. As they hurried from the room, Emily caught a glimpse of Daniel being rushed to safety with his mother. The boy who had risked everything to tell the truth was now in as much danger as she was. But this time, Emily wasn't alone in her fight. The real criminals had finally been exposed, and their entire empire was about to come crashing down. The only question was, how many more lives would be at risk before this was over? Smoke filled the courthouse corridors as emergency sprinklers rained down, turning the marble floors into treacherous skating rinks. Emily Carter ran alongside Agent Rodriguez, clutching her laptop to her chest, while U.S. Marshals formed a protective circle around them. The sound of gunfire echoed from the floor below. "Status report," Rodriguez shouted into her radio. "3 teams of armed suspects," came the crackled response. "They're systematically searching the building. These aren't street thugs. They're using military-style tactics." Emily's mind raced. Fletcher must have hired mercenaries. He's not just trying to silence us. He's trying to recover the evidence before it reaches the FBI servers. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with James Morton. The prosecutor was alone, his tie askew, his face pale with panic. When he saw Emily, his eyes went wide with recognition and fear. "Going somewhere, Mr. Morton?" Rodriguez's gun was drawn before he could move. "Perhaps to warn your friend Fletcher?" Morton raised his hands slowly. "You don't understand. Fletcher's insane. When he realizes he can't contain this, he'll..." A bullet shattered the window behind him, sending glass spraying in all directions. Morton dove to the floor as the marshals returned fire. "2 shooters, southeast building," one marshal shouted. "They've got the courthouse surrounded." Emily grabbed Morton's arm, hauling him behind a pillar as more bullets whizzed past. "Where's the underground facility? The one under the Miller Steel factory?" "What?" Don't lie." Emily's voice was steel. "There are children down there. If Fletcher follows his scorched earth protocol, he's already ordered it." Morton's face crumpled. "That's why I was running. I never signed up for. I mean, the fraud schemes were one thing, but finishing kids? There's a thermite-based incendiary system throughout the underground complex. Once it's triggered..." Emily's blood ran cold. "How long?" 2 hours. Maybe less." Rodriguez grabbed Morton's collar. "Call them. Tell them to stop." "I can't. Fletcher's cutting all communication links. Anyone who knows about the operation is either being eliminated or evacuated. We're all loose ends to him now." Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Through the chaos, Emily heard a sound that made her heart stop: Daniel screaming. She spun toward the sound. Down the smoke-filled hallway, she could see 2 men in tactical gear dragging Daniel away from his mother, who lay motionless on the floor. The boy was fighting with everything he had, but he was no match for the trained mercenaries. "They're taking him back," Emily whispered in horror. "Fletcher wants to make an example of him." Rodriguez was already calling for backup, but Emily knew help wouldn't arrive in time. She thrust her laptop into Morton's hands. "Get this to the FBI? All the evidence is there." "What are you?" Rodriguez started, but Emily was already moving. She sprinted down the hallway, keeping low. Years of fear and hiding dissolved in the face of one simple truth: she couldn't let them take Daniel. Not again. Not after everything. The mercenaries saw her coming. One raised his weapon, but Emily was running on pure adrenaline. She tackled him low, the way her brother had taught her in backyard football games a lifetime ago. The man's head cracked against the wall, his grip on Daniel loosening. The second mercenary swung his rifle toward her, but Daniel, brave, incredible Daniel, drove his elbow back into the man's solar plexus, just as the first marshal's bullet found its target. Emily grabbed Daniel and rolled them behind a heavy desk as gunfire erupted from both directions. Through the chaos, she could hear Rodriguez coordinating with tactical teams, Morton spilling everything he knew about Fletcher's operations, and the growing wail of sirens outside. "Emily!" Daniel's voice shook. "My mom! She's alive!" Rodriguez called out, checking Sarah Hayes' pulse. "Just stunned. We need medical up here." Suddenly, Morton's voice cut through the chaos. "The server upload is complete. FBI has everything." A new sound filled the air: helicopter rotors. Through the broken windows, Emily could see FBI tactical helicopters approaching, while SWAT teams breached the building's entrances. Fletcher's mercenaries were now trapped. But Emily's relief was short-lived. Her eyes fell on the laptop screen, still displaying the Miller Steel factory schematics. Dozens of children were still trapped underground, and a massive incendiary system was counting down to their elimination. She looked at Daniel, who had nearly died trying to save her. At his mother, who was finally beginning to stir. At Rodriguez, who had trusted her instincts despite the overwhelming odds. At Morton, who had chosen to help them in the end, even knowing it might cost him his life. Emily stood, her decision made. Agent Rodriguez, I need transport to Miller Steel. And I need it now. You can't be serious. Morton sputtered. That place will be a death trap. There are children down there. Emily's voice broke. Children like Daniel, who thought no one was coming to save them. I won't let them die thinking that. Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'm coming with you. Me too, Daniel said firmly. No! Emily and his mother spoke simultaneously. But Daniel stood his ground. I remember the tunnels. The access points. The security systems. You need me. He's right, Rodriguez said quietly. We're facing a countdown, and we don't have time to figure it out ourselves. Sarah Hayes struggled to her feet, supported by a paramedic. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw not just the trauma he'd endured, but the strength he'd found. Promise me you'll stay with Agent Rodriguez. Promise me you'll be careful. Daniel hugged his mother fiercely. I promise. Emily felt the weight of what they were about to attempt. The evidence was secure, Fletcher's operation was exposed, and she was finally free of the burden she'd carried for 3 years. She could walk away now, let the FBI handle the rest. But as she looked at Daniel's determined face, she knew there was never really a choice. Agent Rodriguez, she said, how fast can your helicopter get us to Miller Steel? The agent was already moving. Fast enough. But what we find there will be worse than anything we've faced so far. Emily finished. I know. As they rushed toward the roof access, Emily silently promised every child trapped in those tunnels, this time, they wouldn't have to save themselves. This time, help was coming. The only question was, would they get there in time? The old Miller Steel factory loomed against the darkening sky, its rusted skeleton a monument to forgotten industry. FBI tactical teams had already secured the perimeter, but Emily Carter knew the real battle waited below ground. She studied Daniel's crayon map one last time as their helicopter touched down. 53 minutes until the incendiary system activates, Agent Rodriguez announced, checking her tactical gear. No response from the disposal unit yet. We're not waiting, Emily said, helping Daniel secure his borrowed protective vest. It was too big for him, but it was better than nothing. Where's the main access point? Daniel pointed to a seemingly solid concrete wall. There. Behind those old storage tanks. The keypad is hidden under a fake electrical panel. As they approached, Rodriguez's radio crackled. Target vehicle spotted. Marcus Fletcher's private helicopter just landed at his estate. FBI teams moving to intercept. Emily forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Fletcher would face justice, but right now, children's lives hung in the balance. She watched as Daniel found the hidden panel and entered a code from memory. They changed it every week, he explained as the wall silently split open. But I remembered all of them. Just in case. The tunnel beyond was dark and cold, industrial pipes running along concrete walls. Their flashlight beams caught the glint of security cameras. They'll know we're here, Rodriguez warned. Good. Emily's voice was hard. Let them know help is coming. They moved deeper into the complex, following Daniel's directions. The first children they found were in a packaging room, working in fearful silence despite the alarms blaring through the facility. When they saw Daniel, their eyes went wide with recognition. It's okay, Daniel called out. We're here to take you home. Rodriguez's team began evacuating the children while Emily and Daniel pressed on. Each room they cleared lifted a weight from Emily's heart, but also added to her fear. According to Daniel's count, they were still missing 7 kids. The special project room, Daniel whispered, his face pale. That's where they keep the ones who try to escape. In the deepest level. A gunshot echoed through the tunnels. Up ahead, 2 armed guards blocked their path. Rodriguez stepped forward, weapon raised. "Federal agent! Drop your weapons!" Instead of complying, one guard smiled and pressed a button on his radio. Suddenly, the tunnel filled with the grinding sound of heavy machinery. "They're accelerating the countdown!" Emily realized in horror. "How long?" Rodriguez checked her tablet. 15 minutes. Maybe less. The guards used the distraction to open fire. Rodriguez pushed Emily and Daniel behind a concrete pillar, returning fire with precision. Within moments, both guards were down. "Go!" Rodriguez ordered. "Get to the lower level. I'll hold this position and coordinate the evacuation." They found the final room exactly where Daniel remembered, but the security door was sealed with an electronic lock they hadn't seen before. Through the reinforced window, Emily could see children huddled in corners, looking up at them with desperate hope. "I don't know this lock," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "They must have changed it after I escaped." Emily examined the control panel. "It's networked into their main system. If I can access it the same way I got into their servers." She pulled out her phone, fingers flying over the screen as she attempted to hack the lock. But a new alarm began blaring, the final countdown. 5 minutes until incendiary ignition, a computerized voice announced. Emily's hands were shaking. Every attempt to crack the lock was denied. She could hear the children crying inside, could see the terror in their eyes. After everything they'd survived, everything they'd endured, they couldn't fail now. Suddenly, Daniel grabbed her arm. "The vents!" He pointed to a maintenance panel near the floor. "That's how they bring in food. It connects to all the rooms down here." Emily ripped open the panel. The space was tiny, too small for an adult. But not too small for a brave 10-year-old boy. "Daniel, no!" But he was already crawling through. Emily watched helplessly as he disappeared into the ventilation system. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. 2 minutes until incendiary ignition. Just when Emily was about to scream in frustration, the lock panel blinked green. The door slid open, and Daniel stood on the other side, grinning despite his scraped knees and dusty clothes. "Told you I remembered everything," he said. They rushed the children toward the exit, Emily carrying the smallest one who was too weak to run. Above them, the facility's speakers continued their countdown. 1 minute until incendiary ignition. Rodriguez met them halfway, helping to shepherd the children up the main tunnel. They could feel the heat building in the walls as the incendiary system prepared to activate. 30 seconds. The first exit was sealed. They ran for the secondary escape route. 20 seconds. The children were crying, but they kept moving. 10 seconds. They could see the exit ahead, FBI agents waving them forward. 5, 4, 3. Emily felt the heat building behind them. 2, 1. They burst out into the cool night air as the first explosions rocked the facility. Emily did a frantic head count as Rodriguez's team moved the children toward waiting ambulances. All 18 children were safe. They had done it. Hours later, Emily sat in Judge Henderson's chambers again, but everything had changed. Fletcher was in custody, his entire operation exposed. The evidence Emily had gathered had led to arrests across 12 states. Morton had turned state's witness, helping to identify corrupt officials throughout the system. But most importantly, families were being reunited. In the courthouse lobby, parents who had thought their children lost forever were holding them again. Emily watched through the window as Daniel sat with his mother, both of them talking to other parents, helping them understand what their children had been through and how to help them heal. Judge Henderson cleared her throat. "Ms. Carter, I have your verdict here." Emily turned to face her, ready to accept whatever justice demanded. "In light of the extraordinary circumstances and overwhelming evidence of your actions to protect these children, all charges against you are dismissed." The judge smiled. "But I think you've already received the real verdict." She gestured to the window, where Daniel had spotted Emily watching. He waved, his smile brighter than any she had seen before. "He was right about you," Judge Henderson said softly. "You are a hero." Emily pressed her hand against the glass, tears flowing freely now. For 3 years she had carried the weight of silence, enduring hatred and accusations to protect children she had never expected to see again. Now, watching them return to their families, she finally felt that weight lift. "No," she whispered, thinking of Daniel's courage in the courtroom, in the tunnels, and every moment since his escape. "He's the hero. They all are. They just needed someone to believe in them." Outside, the sun was rising on a new day. There would be more battles ahead, trials to attend, testimonies to give, families to help heal. But Emily wasn't alone anymore. The truth had finally set them all free.